may be following the best farming practices there are, but if there is hail, it can destroy everything. This is the reason why in this hail-prone region, everybody puts on hail nets. And as it happened, we were perhaps the only ones in the area who were not able to put up our hail nets on time. And yesterday we were rocked by 7 minutes of hail, because of which there was significant damage to our fruits. Now it was not a very heavy hailstorm. It came for a couple of minutes. It lasted about 7 to 8 minutes and it came with the rain. But if you have fruits which have grown to this size, it can lead to significant damage. Now if you look at this apricot tree, and I think this is the Permaculture, these apricots have had a significant damage. Almost all the apricots have these marks on them. Now these marks have ensured that my apricots are not going to be market worthy. I cannot really take it to the market, because what determines the saleability of any fruit, unfortunately, is how good it looks. That's why people pour a lot of pesticides into the aesthetics of the fruit to grow it into the right size and make it look all very pretty. Now this definitely is not a pretty sight. This is not something that you can sell in the market. Now thankfully, as far as we are concerned, the options for us are not limited just for the market. We can also process the apricots, we can dehydrate them, we can jam them, and we can also use them in our mojitos in our restaurant Cafe Koblu in Shimla. So because we have this option, we can process them, but a lot of farmers do not really have an option of processing the fruits. They do not really have a market where they can use these apricots. They depend on the market to sell their products. And imagine if somebody had just the apricots growing and these apricots had this kind of a damage that I've had, their crops would be ruined for the year. Their entire income for the entire year would have gone.
But thankfully, we don't have a monoculture, but a diversity of different fruits growing on the farm. We have the plums, which seems okay. The peaches seems okay as well. And then the late harvest varieties of cherries are fine. Then of course, the blackberries and the raspberries are okay because they have not even had a bloom yet. And okay also are apples and the pears. But
All the apricots, especially the ones that are facing upwards, have had a hail strike and they are significantly damaged. Where the plums had set, those plums are in trouble. They have had this marking. Now the marking over here does not seem very significant, but this can lead to misshapen fruit in the future. This can lead to misshapen plums. This can lead to fruit drop. Fruits can drop off the branch. And also if you look at the leaves are in tatters, which means that we won't have enough photosynthesis. This tree is going to be in stress, and that is going to definitely impact the kind of fruit quality we are going to get from the plum tree. Now this is the advantage of having a polyculture, having a diversity of different crops. You lose one crop, but you can depend on something else that is growing on the farm. Like we have the cherries over here, which have not really set the fruit, and it has not set the fruit, which means that it is somewhat safe from the hail. This is the sea buckthorn tree, resilient as ever. Hail, frost, storms, nothing can, I think, have any kind of an effect on this wild Himalayan shrub. But its neighbor, the big red apricot, has had a significant damage to almost all the apricots on it.
almost every apricot on this tree has a hail strike on it. All the apricots seem bruised.
These do not look good at all, and they are going to lead to a fruit which is going to be misshapen. This is maybe going to impact the size of the fruit. This is also going to be the entry point for diseases. What is recommended for us is to do some kind of a fungal foliar spray within 48 hours of the hail, and we have to look at some organic options for fungicides, because we do not want any kind of pathogens to enter these injury points on the apricots. These are the injury points on the apricots from which pathogens can enter, and the pathogens can of course spread all over the fruit tree, damage whatever is left of the fruit, and create a kind of a disease ridden fruit tree, which can also impact the kind of fruit that we're going to get next year. These were almost walnut sized, and they have completely been scalded from the top. Look at this. This was the big red, and this had given us a significant amount of crop, as you can see this year. Last year did not bear us anything at all, but this year there was a lot of promise, there was a lot of hope, but the hail has come, just a couple of minutes of hail, and it has ensured that there's going to be not much that we're going to harvest in terms of good quality fruit from the apricots. Now, as I've been observing, of course, the bigger the fruit, bigger the damage, because it had more surface area for the hail to strike it. So all our early fruiting varieties, the early harvest varieties of apricots are in danger. Also, along with it, also are in danger are our early harvest varieties of plums and cherries, because the fruit set much before the others. So what are safe really are our late harvest varieties of plums and the late harvest varieties of cherries. Apricots, all of them had put on almost about if not a walnut sized apricot like this, they had grown to a size of about a marble or so, on which the hail has left its mark, unfortunately. Next to the big red, we have this early harvest variety of plum called the Black Splendor. This is about pea sized. These markings are going to ensure that this is plum is not going to develop much. It's going to be misshapen perhaps. Now this is also going to be vulnerable to diseases. These markings, these bruises are going to be the entry point for diseases and pathogens. Now if you look at this plum tree, it looks absolutely bedraggled. The leaves are all in tatters because of the hail. Now fortunately for us, some of the apricots which are under the branches and covered by some kind of foliage were saved from the hail. The hails could not really reach them, but there are not too many of these. Most of them have damage, such as this over here, was because they're completely exposed to the hail. This one had the advantage of having this branch on top as a cover. This particular apricot is the wondercot. So apricots which are under the branches are the ones that are safe. But the problem here is that these are the ones which are also not going to receive any kind of sunlight. These are the ones which are going to be away from direct sunlight, and sunlight is very important for the growth, for the quality of the fruit that you are producing on your fruit trees. Usually the apricots which are under the branches are the ones that we thin out. We thin them out because they are going to be away from direct sunlight. So this is a very young apple tree on M9 rootstock. It is in the stage called the petal drop. Most of the petals also were shattered by the hail, but this has not had that kind of an impact because the fruit set had not happened. And in the terrace opposite, we have this apricot, the pink cot, I think it is, and these had also developed. Some of them are clean because it had a lot of fruit on top and a lot of branches, a lot of perhaps the leaves to protect it. Not all is lost, as I can see, but any fruit facing upwards have had markings such as these, which of course does not look very good. These apricots, one over here, absolutely clean as if there was no hail whatsoever, all because there were branches on top protecting the apricots down below. But most of our apricots are shaped like this. They have an open center formation where there's nothing in the center. This is also called a wine goblet shape because it's shaped like a wine goblet. This is the ideal formation for the apricots, and this is the kind of formation we have given to most of the apricots on the farm. The idea of having them open like that with an open center, nothing in the center, no branch in the center, no single leader like you have for apples and the pears, is that One, of course, because the natural propensity of an apricot is to grow like this. It's going to have a good circulation of air in the center, and all these branches are going to be exposed to the sunlight, which also means that these apricots are also going to be exposed to the full brunt of the hail. Now, what works for the sunlight does not work for the hail. While the apricots had a significant damage because the fruits had already grown very big, the Diante over here, the European plum, had barely had a petal fall. These have not yet set fruit, which means that we are still going to be harvesting a lot of our plums from our farm.
But this early harvest variety of plum, very helpfully called the early queen, has had significant damage because the plums had become somewhat bigger. These are marble sized, and this is the kind of damage that it has incurred.
This particular apricot is the hollycod. The hollycod is one of the few apricots that we have on the farm which require cross pollination, and this had set fruit as well, but now we have this damage to deal with. But there is one fruit on the farm where I do not find any injury mark whatsoever. This is the peach. The variety over here is the local peach, and there is not a single mark on it, even though this branch was exposed to the hail, but there is no injury mark whatsoever on any of the fruitlets as we saw on the apricots. This is evidently a late harvest variety of cherry, and this one is called the Ferravia, and these flowers have not formed into fruitlets, so this one is going to be safe. So we are going to still be able to pick some cherries on our farm. Now in the row opposite we have the pink jewel. It has had the leaves stripped off, but I can still see the fruit. The fruit is very small. Now I think the fruit was really very small for the hail to have any impact on them. These fruitlets are very small, and if the hail sort of touched them, it could have just snicked them and gone by and not had any kind of a significant impact. So we are still going to be harvesting a lot of plums, and its neighbor is the peach tree, and surprisingly I do not see any kind of marking on it, no marking whatsoever. There is no evidence at all that there has been an impact of hail on this tree. But the neighbor, of course, is the apricot, and this apricot is the pliacot, and the pliacot, of course, is not that lucky. All these injury marks on the pliacot. Now there are also injury marks on the cherries, the early harvest varieties of cherries, which had already started setting these fruits. These fruits have a marking on them. As far as blackberries and the raspberries are concerned, there has been a zero impact, thankfully, of the hail. The hail has not even had any impact on these very sturdy leaves of the blackberry. As you can see over here, they are all very healthy and nothing has happened. Now the blackberry has also started putting out these buds, so there were no flowers on this, there was no damage whatsoever to the blackberries and also to the raspberries. Now whereas the blueberries, which had pushed out the flowers, those flowers were badly damaged. Now how does the hail form in the first place? Now it's a very interesting weather phenomenon which occurs very high up in the sky, where in this time of the year, because the land has been heated up, all the warm air rises up, and that is called an updraft. Now if these updrafts are very strong, they can go as high as almost about 20,000 feet or so, where all the moisture can turn into ice crystals, and depending on the strength of the storm, the strength of the updraft, these ice crystals
Can remain suspended in that very high altitude.
where the temperatures are freezing, and these ice crystals, they collide into each other, they become bigger and bigger, and again depending on the strength of this updraft, depending on the strength of the storm, they can remain suspended for very long. The longer that they are up there, the bigger the hails will form, and then there comes a time when the gravity takes over and they fall down as hail, and we have seen the evidence of that just yesterday on our apricots. So the hail has had a significant impact on the apricots. not so much on the peaches. Peaches seem spotless, and then not so much also on the late harvest varieties of cherries that we have on the farm, not also on the late harvest varieties of plums that we have on the farm. Now this gives me an opportunity again to beat my drum about having diversity on the farm. Now if I were a farmer who was dependent only on the apricots and the apricots were my livelihood, I would have nothing to show for this year. There would be no apricots, there would be no livelihood, there would be nothing whatsoever because all the apricots have been damaged.
So it's a good idea.
Not just to have diversity of different species of plants and trees on the farm, but also to have diversity within the same species, which means having early harvest varieties and having late harvest varieties. Now, we also were struck by the frost in which the late harvest varieties were safe because they had not pushed out any flowers at all, which the early harvest varieties had pushed out. So the late harvest varieties in that sense were safe from the spring frost. So when you have this mishmash of a diversity of different fruit trees, different kinds of berries growing on the farm, there will always be something growing on the farm regardless of what the weather throws at you. And the weather is definitely going to throw something at us because unfortunately we are living in the era of climate change.